Today's episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast is sponsored by TCG Player, your source for all your trading card game needs. Use our link in the description the next time you get your cards to help support the show. Today's episode is also made possible by our Patreon subscribers. If you want to support the show directly, head over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and you can become part of the Sculpty family today. Or if you don't want to do any of that, leave a like and comment on YouTube or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as an offering to Algorithm Jesus.
Welcome everybody to I forgot the radio stations and Fallout names.
There's Galaxy
I'm
News
74 Radio. Cat.
There's Galaxy News Radio and then Diamond City Radio.
That's right. Yeah. It's weird because I have like a zillion hours played in like New Vegas in Fallout 3, and I just don't remember specific, like this very ADHD thing, right? Where it's just like I'm just like, yeah, it's like the guy and the dinosaur and the guy in the big tower thing in the middle of the strip, and people are like, "Are you talking about this person?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that guy." Is
it just called Radio New Vegas? Because like there was such like Diamond News Radio is so iconic in 4, and then Galaxy News Radio is so like iconic in 3 because obviously it's like part of the main plot to go visit Three Dog, right? Now I'm like, I feel like New Vegas didn't have like a whole radio thing go on, which is crazy because it's like
the radio station was like in New Vegas less of the plot,
right?
Because I swear to God, I'm not going to turn this into a video essay about why 3 and 4 suck compared to New Vegas, but it just. There's so much more game around New Vegas than there is in 3 and 4.
Honestly, this entire set has just made me want to play the games again. That is just really what it's
big same. Yeah, I definitely am re-downloading New Vegas, and I think I did that like yesterday.
I tried to get Lua to play, but they were like, the graphics are so bad, I can't do this thing. And I was like, you're a heretic, but I understand.
Sam said that too. We were at dinner with Sam on Friday night. We're recording this like the day after we got back from MagicCon Chicago, and which was awesome. But we had dinner with the Howling Salt Mine friends on Friday night, and Sam said something similar about that, where he was just like, I just can't do the graphics of New Vegas. And I'm telling you, it's New Vegas, I'm telling you, like New Vegas, not liking the graphics of 3 and being a little put off by that, I get to some extent, because like 3 as a game is like a little bit lackluster as compared to like all the other Fallout games.
Well, like at the time it was revolutionary, you know what I mean?
It was very good at the time, right?
Yeah.
But New Vegas like just stands the test of time, like just across the board. It's just is a good game.
I also want to say, before we go too deep in the sauce, thank you to every single person at Chicago who came up and had Cal and I sign things, who came and said hello. We were there for like 2 hours, and there was like a slow period when we first started because the line was also like a hybrid Crybabies and Us line. But then we were like busy for 2 hours, genuinely, and it was amazing. There were so many cool people there. So many people took Mind Sculptors prints. We had so many people who we gave packs to. There were some really, really freaking sweet people who came up to us and said hi. So thank you all so much for the people who came up and said that. It genuinely means the world to us. And for everyone who showed up to the Learn to Play cEDH event the next day, or that same day.
No, that was literally just
same day. That day was crazy. It was like 10 hours of just teaching and signing and stuff. But genuinely, there were so many sweet people. So many amazing folks who came up and were like, oh, you guys are the reason that we do cEDH in general. Like, it was just, I mean, like, can't describe enough how wonderful of an experience that was. So thank you to everyone who came by.
It kind of always blows me away how many people actually listen to this, because like I know people listen right? Like conceptually speaking, but and it's like, oh, it's like our friend group or whatever. Right, and then I like go out into the wild and I meet people that I've just never met before. And they're just like, oh yeah, I love your takes on this. And it's, what are your thoughts on this? And it's like, oh, you love it when you hate on Rogsai. And it's just like all this stuff is, I heard that constantly over the weekend was keep hammering on Rogsai. I was like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's 8.25 thousand subscribers at the point of recording this. That's 8,000 people, and we're really freaking grateful for each and every one of you. So thank you.
It's so cool. I also this was a cool thing over the weekend is we both did this, but we got to I signed my first Jace the Mind Sculptor over the weekend, which I've never had happen before, which really you think cool. would have happened at some point. Yeah. But it was a fan of the show. He's everywhere in the community, but a guy came up and like, will you sign this foil Jace? And I was like, you sure?
I've had a couple of those recently where people have asked me to sign things and I've been like, you sure about that?
Are you?
But that one was really cool. Like it's been several months now since I've officially been your co-host, but I think that's the first time we've had like a full Mind Sculptors signing of something like that. It was really cool.
It also really put into perspective how much we need to figure merch stuff.
Oh yeah. Honestly, like here's the real thing. If you all would actually buy Mind Sculptors merch, can you leave a comment down below so we can have a quantifiable amount to justify our decisions, so that we can be like, because the more of you that say that will make us look at each other and go, okay, now we're actually just being irresponsible, not doing this thing.
There were like a bunch of times over the weekend where Cassidy came with me. And so like I got to teach her magic over the weekend, which hilariously day 3 of her knowing magic, we were hanging out with Spleen Face and Sick Robot, and Sick decides that day 3 is a perfect time for Cassidy to learn how to play Dan. So
which was hilarious.
It was very funny. But she was with me and she was just like, oh, there's all this cool stuff that other people are doing. So why don't you do that? And I was like, well, because if you leave it to just 2 of the most, like, our heads are literally everywhere at any given time, people, things just kind of happen. It was like, what was the beat? I posted that picture of like Phineas and Ferb the other day where it was just like 10. I said POV, it's 10 minutes before recording. And we're like, what do you want to do today, Ferb? So that is how we roll. But again, thank you so much for everybody who came out. It was great. Also, thank you to Wizards for having us. That was so cool. I can't say enough. And also, that was the first sold out fucking MagicCon, which was wild to be at. 12,000 fucking people. Yeah.
Very, very cool experience. I will say, not enough space, period. A lot of people were really upset about that. And I think that was a major problem. We're a little disappointed about that part of it. And I will, be giving that feedback to Wizards immediately, basically being like, hey, if you're going to, like, this was my quote from the weekend, which was like, if you're going to sell enough space for 12,000 people, there should be enough space for 12,000 people. Like, if you're going to put a cap on something, that should insinuate that means there's exactly 1 seat for everybody, right? Like that should, if people sign up to go to a thing, they should be able to go to a thing, right? So that part was a little disappointing, but the experience overall was amazing. So
yes, very much so. Great seeing everybody. Great seeing the preview panels and all that shit. So also, I found out that I guess I kind of sort of knew this, but I got to find out that Covert Go Blue is a fan of the channel, which is cool. That one made me feel really good.
He's an absolutely lovely nugget of a human being.
Yeah, I got to talk to him and Sam from Ristic Studies for a little bit on Saturday and Sunday, and it was cool. But today we are here, as we said at the top of the show, we are here to do our Fallout set review. And this is a pretty cool, magic never changes, right? Some shit like that. Like,
my name for today's recording is part never changes, which I'm pretty sure is pretty good.
I am very excited for the set, if for nothing else than the return of energy mechanic, which is one of my all-time favorite mechanics.
I love when this happens, where you and I love absolutely just complete antithetical things in a set, and it's so nice. It's like, what do you mean? I am super in love with the rad mechanic and in the proliferate stuff, and you're just like energy, and I'm like, yeah, this is great because we can love completely different things in this set and still get jazzed about it.
This is one of the things that I think is cool about energy, is just making me revisit the cube I built like over almost 2 years ago now, which is like an energy and vehicle, like fully powered cube, where it was like you had all of the like power 9 and all that shit, all of really powerful cards, but all of your payoff spells were like energy or vehicles. And so it was just like, it was very fun. But I'm excited to revisit those mechanics and stuff. And so let's take a look at
we have a lot
some of the commanders from this set. Yeah, we've got a bunch to talk about here. So let's start off with the first one, which is Curie, Emergent Intelligence. It is a 1/3 legendary artifact creature robot that costs a generic and a blue. And it says, whenever Curie deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its base power. And then it also has an activated ability that costs a generic and a blue. Exile another non-token artifact creature you control. Curie becomes a copy of the exiled creature, except it has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its base power. Oh boy, that has some, that really relies on your layer or your understanding of layers to work. So that's a cool card. What are your thoughts on this one, Ian?
So this is one of my inclusions. I don't know that this is actually going to do it, right? So the tough part with mono blue is, unless you have an outlet in the command zone, it doesn't really win super great, right? Like you kind of have to get real funky with it. But what this does do that I really enjoy is that this is a 2-card combo with Phyrexian Dreadnought that curves perfectly, right? So you go like turn 2, so at 2 mana, Curie, next turn, untap, play your land for turn. Play Dreadnought, use Curie's ability, make Curie a 12/12 and hit somebody and draw 12 cards, which is like, that's kind of like the idea of why I really like this card. And also specifically, tutoring exactly 1-drop artifacts is something blue does really, really well. You have like
bizarrely well,
intuition,
actually.
you have Trinket Mage, you have Urza Saga, right? Like there's actually like a ridiculous amount of things that get exactly blue 1-drops, artifact 1-drops in your hand. So I just think like it's kind of funny that this exists. Maybe at the end of the day, this is just going to be like a casual deck that's like, oh, I gotcha, I draw 12 now, right? But like the idea that there's this like mono blue artifact beatdown control thing you can do is like kind of fun. I don't know. Yeah, it genuinely could be nothing, but I just really think this is sort of some fun, clever synergy. And there's also like other things apart from just the Dreadnought, right? There's like Lunar Prototype, I think is the name of the card, which is like a 2-drop for 5/5 that has a big downside. There's it's basically every payoff in Selvala that's colorless you can use for this deck, right? It's like, Phyrexian, the Snow one, and like there's a bunch of crazy cards that have like a ridiculous amount of power for like 1, 2, or 3 mana. That you can just be like, cool, now I'm going to make my commander hit you for a lot of commander damage, to be clear. It still is your commander and also draws you a ridiculous amount of cards. Now, some of those that have like continual static downside are a lot worse, right? Because it does become a copy of those cards, right? So I think it's much better with something like a Dreadnought, which is just like a 12/12. You know what I mean? Like, and no downside, as opposed to like the other ones I mentioned that have a little bit more of an actual downside.
No, I mean, I think that's kind of interesting. Like, I mean, the ability to like you get a lot of mileage out of Urza Saga with that, right? Because you just kind of go turn 1 Saga, turn 2 any blue producing land.
Right. You play your
commander, turn 3. Hey, look, here's a Curie and a Dreadnought. Weird how that works.
Like Urza Saga is like actually insane in the deck, because it literally, unless I'm crazy, it curves perfectly, right? Like
that curves perfectly. Yes, 100%.
That's so cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I don't know that I'm ready to write it off. I'm also not really ready to wrap my arms around it.
Sure.
But it's one of those things where it kind of, in a sense, reminds me of like a Tolly, in that like a Tolly kind of has that like, oh, that's cute, sort of like a bit to it, if that makes sense. But I think because of the color it's in, because of what it does, I think there's like a real potential that this like could just do a lot. And be capable of maybe, I don't know that I think this is going to be like on our top 10 list anytime soon, but I think it's interesting. I think that you could definitely dome some people real quick and make people go, oh, fuck, we got to deal with that. Right. And I think that's, not a bad place to be in mono blue.
I also think it's kind of funny, and like this probably is never going to happen in the deck, but like you can just turn your commander into a Blightsteel Colossus, which is like,
you can do that. Yes. That is interesting.
I don't think that's what the deck's going to be doing, but it's still funny.
Yeah. Next card on the list is Dr. Madison Li. It is a 2/3 legendary human scientist that costs a blue, red, and white, and says whenever you cast an artifact spell, you get an energy counter. And it has 3 activated abilities. The first one is you tap and pay 1 energy. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains trample and haste until end of turn. The second is to tap it and pay 3 energy and draw a card. And the last is to tap it, pay 5 energy, and return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. I added this. I don't know that there are, I'm sure there are some combos that you could work out with this somehow. Not really sure. But specifically the part about this that I really like is the ability to passively generate energy very easily. It makes stuff with Hullbreaker give you a energy outlet, which is really good.
That is one of my problems with the card, is that like it isn't an outlet for energy, right?
For
Hullbreaker. I mean,
so it is in a way, and here's why. The not totally, but the big issue with energy cards is generating the energy. Right. Getting payoffs for energy cards are incredibly easy. There's a zillion of them. The issue the issue ends up being you've got to be able to generate a bunch of mana to do it. One of the things that you can do is you are able to, you can kind of do like Osgear-esque combos with it, where you can make copies of Gonti's Aetherheart over and over again, and then you're able to return it, make a copy of it, put it back to the battlefield, do all that, and just kind of take turns over and over again.
Also the Lightning Tower too that just works with Hullbreaker Horror too.
The Helix, I forget the name of it, but
it's also really important to point out, and because this is our first energy card we're talking about, we talked a bit about this pre-show, but they have this weekend at Chicago spoiled the fact that there is going to be a revisitation of the energy mechanic in Modern Horizons 3, which is coming out later this year.
Which also tells you that they're going to be giving it a lot. They're going to be putting it's going to get super powered up.
Right. And so when we talk about these cards, there is a certain amount of, not only are we saying this is going to be better in the future, hypothetically, we're like, this is going to be better in the future because we know for a fact they are printing more cards that pay off with this thing. Right.
And also to add on to that, the fact that they are doing 2 kind of concurrent sets with energy indicates that we're going to be doing this more. This is going to be around more often. And that's also sort of by popular demand. A lot of people really wanted energy to be coming back. It was a mechanic that kind of felt like it was underexplored after Kaladesh.
We're having trouble making it fair, which is why I think you're seeing it put in a Commander product and putting it in Modern Horizons, right? And I think that's a very smart design.
I do too. You could put it in 2 extraordinarily safe places for it to be broken. And I think both of these places are going to be fine for it. But that being said, I don't know that this is a commander right now. It might not even be a commander this summer. But it is a card that I think has a lot of upward potential. Yeah. I think that first line of text, whenever you cast an artifact spell, you get an energy counter, is reminiscent of something like Joyra in a way.
Yeah. It's also very good with Jeskai Ascendancy, I will say.
Yes, it is. Yes. So maybe that's a good Jeskai Ascendancy deck, right? Like,
if you do any of the Retraction Helix combos, right? So for those who don't know, there are cards like Retraction Helix, and there's a couple others that exist that basically say like you can have a creature tap to bounce a permanent, right?
Yep.
So say you have like a Mox Opal, you have a creature that isn't Dr. Madison Li, tap, put the Mox Opal back to hand, play it again, right? So now you're untapping all of your stuff. You're doing that over and over again, and you're playing an artifact infinitely, right? With the Ascendancy. At that point, and I know this sounds like a lot of pieces, but this is just kind of how Jeskai Ascendancy stuff works, where it's like, it looks like a lot of pieces until it's winning the game.
It's also one of those things where it's stuff you're going to be playing anyway, generally. Like it's generally with Jeskai Ascendancy, it's not asking you to, outside of the like Retraction Helix thing, right? It's not really asking you to play cards that you're not going to be playing otherwise. It's just kind of like you're going to be playing you're going to be playing creatures, right? Creatures good. You're going to be playing Mana Rocks, right? Mana Rocks good. And it's just kind of like, here's a bunch of stuff that synergizes really well.
Yeah. And so once with the loop we talked about earlier, when you demonstrate that loop, you have infinite energy, right? And then you can start tapping Madison, then bouncing the thing, playing it again, untapping everything, right? And she draws your whole deck. So, moving pieces, but enough that it makes it worth it, I think.
Yeah. And it's in great colors for these types of moving pieces. So this is really exciting. I don't know how far it's going to be, how far it'll go. It's interesting. I don't know exactly what to do with it right away, but it has enough of the like DNA of a card that can be good. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Next card on our list is ED-E, Lonesome Eyebot. This is a 2/1 legendary artifact creature robot that costs 3 generic mana and has flying, and says when it has 2 different abilities. One, whenever you attack, if the number of attacking creatures is greater than the number of quest counters on ED-E, put a quest counter on it. And the second ability is pay 2 generic mana, sacrifice ED-E, and draw a card, then draw an additional card for each quest counter on ED-E. So, Ian, this was a card that you put on our review board, and this is, I mean, just right off the bat, like, it draws a bunch of cards.
So for those who are looking at this card and going, all right, Ian, what are you doing, bud? This is this is an infinite colorless mana outlet in the command zone, right? So I think there's been a lot of conversations about like trying to make the first consistent consistent colorless cEDH deck, right? And people thought Liberator was doing it, and I think this is a really good like definition of like chicken or the egg scenario, right? Where it's like, oh, do you want the thing that flashes in the artifacts, or do you want the thing that like is the outlet in the command zone? And for me, I'm always more of a like, I'd rather play like an infinite mana outlet in the command zone before I play something like, Yeva, right? And also with the high redundancy of these flash enablers in colorless right now, right? We have Shimmermere, we have the Cicada, we have Liberator, we have a couple others too, right? So like if you want that, you can easily stuff your deck full of that effect. But there's actually a decent amount, and I encourage you to do your research on how to make some of these like giant layered combos, because I'm definitely going to be building this deck at least for fun. Just to play. And I just think it's really cool to have a colorless deck in the format that you can be able to use. I think it's very easy to sort of, get really excited about like the fact that you get to play a bunch of non-basic colorless lands that all have different utility, right? Like every single land drop being a spell is actually kind of hot. Which is like one of the biggest benefits, I think, of playing colorless. The biggest downside is that you feed the living shit out of a dockside, right? But that can, you can afford to play things like Torpor Orb in these colors, right? Because you don't really have super powerful ETBs. So that's at least some counterattack. So you kind of got to like play this like artifact Staxy role, which is already an archetype I enjoy quite a lot. And then you get a bunch of really consistent infinite mana combos that are like, not the easiest to tutor, but you are just kind of doing the thing. And I think that there are enough pieces that kind of do this well that I think it's a playable colorless cEDH deck, which I think is really cool. I think this is just like one of those things that I'm super glad exists in the format. I think, am I expecting someone to come and like swamp a tournament with it? Absolutely not. But am I confident in knowing that there is a build of this deck that someone could sit down with at a cEDH table and all of us are like, hell yeah, dude, colorless deck. Like, that's so cool. And we're going to get our teeth stomped in because they're not going to respect the robot, and it's going to be dope. Also, the fact that like it is technically card draw in the command zone, right? Like you do have the outlet part of it, but like there is a decent amount of grind game that you can use with this card. And, if you go to combat, like for a couple turns in a row, pop it, draw 5 cards, and then see what happens from there. It's like, it's not crazy. The One Ring also makes colorless decks just like infinitely more viable than they ever were before. Right. So I'm excited this deck exists. I'm excited this card exists. It'll be fun. It'll just be a fun brewing experience. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know how much I believe in the colorless experience. And I think that's also just because I don't know how much I believe in the monocolored experience. And so I think when you take all of that away, I start to go, well, I'll believe it when I see it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm not saying it's impossible that Bigfoot exists. I just,
all right.
Show me some compelling evidence, All
right. Now I gotta build this and whoop your ass with it.
Yeah. Well, I would say that's not hard, but if history has proven anything, I'm very good at kicking your ass in Commander games. Next card on our list is Raul, Troubleshooter. Is a 1/4 zombie mutant rogue that costs a generic, a blue, and a black. And says once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from among cards in your graveyard that were milled this turn. Then it has a tapped activated ability that says each player mills a card. We have, what is this? Is this another Dimir Scepter outlet? Oh no.
Yeah. Of course it is. Well, why would it not be another Dimir Scepter outlet, right?
This is really cool. I mean, there's what's the blue-black semi-scepter outlet from Commander Legends that I'm thinking of? Not Nimrus. What's the Merfolk one?
Vohar?
No. That's from Dominaria United. I'm thinking specifically from Commander Legends. Commander
Legends didn't print new cards, right?
It did. What are you talking about? Commander Legends and print new cards?
I think Commander Masters. There's too many fucking sets.
Yes. It's I can't remember the name of it, but Spleen Face. I'm doing great. He played it during the MLC, and I'm like blanking really hard. But I think
you're thinking of the guy from Jumpstart, not from Commander Legends.
No, it's from Commander Legends. I know for sure it's from Commander Legends.
The fight one?
It's not a fight one. No, hold on. Now I gotta fucking look this up. Jesus Christ.
There's a lot of blue-black scepter outlets. Is this worth the deep dive?
It's not, but it's more about the fact that I can't remember the name of it. It's Ariumi, the one that
Rami?
Yeah, that one where you tap exile cards from your graveyard equal to number of opponents you have.
Yeah.
You could recast a creature from your graveyard. Anyway, that's what it makes me think of. All of that just to say that.
Okay. Yeah.
I did not just have a stroke. I swear to God.
For sure. Arami's a lot more of like, recurable value, whereas this one's definitely more of, Arami's not a scepter outlet, right? This one can assemble itself through Scepter and through some Intruder Alarm combos, I'm guessing. I don't really know the exact ones. It would be possible, but it is plausible. I would not suggest it to be optimal.
It's 100% a Scepter outlet, though.
It is very easily. Outlet. And also, like, just every single turn being able to recur something that was put in there is like not bad. It specifically is nice because it is also a Cephalid, Illusionist, and Lightning Greaves / Shuko outlet. You already kind of like Lightning Greaves because it can give Raul haste if you have Isochron Scepter and you don't have haste on it. And also, if you want to do Basalt Mesmeric Orb stuff, which Mesmeric Orb is already good with your commander, right? So,
you might as well, right?
Right. It's a lot of this, right? Like layering on top of layering on top of layering on top of layering on top.
I think that's why, as a Dimir deck, though, I like this more as that like Dimir Scepter layered deck than maybe any of the other ones that we've seen, because everything that those decks want to do, this deck's just like, oh, hey, cool. I want to do that. And I mean, that's exactly what you want to see. Like we've talked before about like, shit. I can't remember any names right now. What's the big slime Dimir deck that everybody plays or that people like? Toxrill, right? There's a bunch of internal inconsistency in the Toxrill deck, right? Like it just has a bunch of weird things, and all of them tend to have these weird, like it likes one piece but not the other. And this is one of the exceptions of that, where this just likes everything that those decks want to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
So yeah, Raul is cool. Also interested about how it might play in some 99s. Not super sold on that, but it has some utility outside of the command zone.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think specifically in like Sultai decks that care about their graveyards, which is most of them. This was a pretty interesting card there. Next card we got here is, speaking of Sultai, the Master Transcendent. This is a 2/4.
I want to talk about the next two together because they are sort of like a coupling package, but you can keep going with this one.
Yeah. So we'll look at the Master Transcendent and the Wise Mothman. And so let's look at first the Master Transcendent. This is a 2/4 legendary artifact creature that is a mutant that costs a generic and Sultai, and says whenever the Master Transcendent enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters. As a tap ability that you just tap it, put target creature card in a graveyard that was milled this way or this turn onto the battlefield under your control. It's a green mutant with base power and toughness 3/3. The other card in this Sultai Wombo combo is the Wise Mothman, which is a 3/3 insect mutant that also costs the generic and Sultai, has flying, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. And whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. So the Master for me is like straight up, automatically, very obviously a good Hermit Druid deck, right? And then what are your thoughts on that and the Wise Mothman?
I genuinely think the Master Transcendent is the best commander from this entire set. I think it's the best card from the entire set by like a really high degree. So I bring up these two together because they're both like infinite cast outlets, right? So they're both food chain outlets. They're both Hullbreaker Horror outlets, right? There's a little bit of like give and take. I think the Master is like mostly better than the Mothman in every way. The biggest downside of the Mothman is it also gives you rad counters, right? Meaning, so if like someone goes to their turn, they have the infinite rad counters attempt to kill them. Actually, Cal, do you want to read rad counters so that this context can be a little more clear?
Let me do that real quick, so that the kids at home know what a rad counter is. A rad counter
is insanely relevant.
Yes,
to this conversation.
A rad counter is a counter that, unlike most other counters, is placed on players rather than objects, and was introduced in the set. Basically, what the ability says is at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if you have any rad counters, mill that many cards. For each non-land card milled this way, you lose 1 life and a rad counter.
Yeah. Right. So the idea basically is that as soon as you have infinite rad counters, you pass the turn to somebody, or they have infinite rad counters, I should say. On their upkeep, they mill their entire deck and take infinite damage, right? So Wise Mothman does that to everybody. When you cast it infinitely, the idea being that like it's a food chain, once again, or Hullbreaker outlet, and then you pass the turn to your opponents and they die 1 by 1 on their upkeep.
Their pre-combat main phase. Yeah, you're right.
What?
Their pre-combat main phase specifically.
Oh, okay. I thought it was upkeep. Okay.
No.
The biggest problem with Mothman is that if someone like Angel's Graces, right, then they pass to you and you die. Right. And like, that's a big problem. The benefits of Mothman are like the manual beatdown plan in the command zone is actually pretty real. And you get to a point like where it just starts to be this like, okay, here's my flying commander, and I'm going to add some of these like, basically like mill pieces that are going to give me some consistent value over time, and then create this like 21 power flyer in the air. Right. That's the big benefits of the Mothman. I think the Master Transcendent is unfortunately just like using the same mechanic, but just better. Right.
Yeah.
When you infinitely cast this, you can give your opponents infinite rad counters. You do not need to take any on yourself. So yeah, they can go like, okay, cool, Angel's Grace. And then you go, great. My turn again. Draw a
Here's
card.
Here's a Thassa's Oracle.
Back to you. Right. Like, so that's part of it too. I didn't even realize it's also an artifact creature. So like straight up, you can play Transmute Artifact and pay 2 extra mana and then go grab a Bolus of Citadel from the command zone. This guy is once again infinite outlet for Food Chain and Hullbreaker Horror, and not even to mention what you just brought up, right? Which is the fact that it's just this amazing Hermit Druid outlet, right?
Yeah.
You mill your entire library once again, or using the Cephalid things, using the Basalt things we talked about earlier.
Well, it's literally the exact same situation as Raul, right? Where it's like we have seen every Sultai Food Chain deck, whether it is, I can't remember the partner one that is escaping me all of a sudden. Or Sidisi or whatever one you want, whether it's the Thrasios builds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All of them have these internal inconsistencies where they don't want to be doing all but some of these mechanics. And then this card, and just like Raul, is just like, nah, give them all here. We cast a big tent here.
Yeah. And the craziest part to me is this is literally, so for those who don't know, history of myself as cEDH player, one of the first decks I went super deep on was I worked on the primer, the like collaborative primer, and my own individual primer on Kazur Ukima Food Chain. Specifically Kazur Ukima Hermit Druid variant of Food Chain.
And I think this kind of puts that to bed.
It does, because this is literally those decks does what they want to do, but better. And then like the only downside is if you're in the last turn of turns, right? You cannot use the Master to kill somebody, right? Like that's the downside I can see of this deck. But this is not a deck where you want to be going in the late game ever, right? But that is literally the biggest downside of this deck. It does the Hermit Druid thing, but actually helps out that game plan. It's not just a coincidentally nice game plan in the command zone, right? It has an uncounterable way to reanimate Thassa's Oracle. You have to literally have Stifle or Bust, right? Like this commander is actually literally perfectly better for that archetype, and you get an extra slot back in your deck.
Which, you get multiple slots back in that deck, actually.
Downside, right?
You get a lot of slots back in that deck because you don't need to be playing like Dread Return, and you don't need to be playing like there's a lot of cards that are dead, quote unquote, that you're just kind of like, okay, I guess I don't need to play those.
Right. And then there's some arguments that like, okay, but I want to be playing those cards as backup plan in case we lose our commander anyways, right? And like 6 of one, half dozen the other kind of thing. But that being said, yeah, this is my favorite Sultai Food Chain outlet. This is so clean. It does the thing exactly the way you want it to. It once again, you don't have a dead partner. You don't have 2 partners that do nothing. You can actually want to play this card and then start like chipping away at your opponent's life totals in those grindier games. Yes, you're milling them out a little bit, but at the same time, also if you're like playing this and then you get to play Mnemonic Betrayal and you're like, cool, I've been incidentally milling you for a turn or 2. I'll take some of your best cards in your graveyard, hurting the Nas plan, right? Like this is. I don't know. This is just such a crazy commander. And I was actually freaking out when I saw the spoiler for Raul, and then they had this card come out. Now one thing to note that I will like vaguely correct you on is that you did say that this is like strictly better than Raul. Raul does have its own upsides. Mainly being that you actually can cast different types of spells out of the graveyard, whereas the Master is just good at reanimating something, right?
Yeah. If I implied that that was a mistake on my part, I was meaning more. It is better than all of the Sultai like Food Chain stuff that we have. I might have misspoke, but no.
Also, the thing we haven't even talked about, which is the fucking craziest part about this card to me, is that there's entirely different lines that we aren't even speaking about, right?
Yeah.
Buried Alive with this commander is a 1-card combo.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can go get like a crazy Necrotic Ooze pile, win the game.
But that's the thing is if you like layered decks, this is the commander for you because you can layer your Bolus of Citadel with Buried Alive with your Shuko, with your everything that we have mentioned in the last 15 minutes. Like all of that layers on top of itself it's well in this.
Reanimation for Razaketh uncounterably in the command zone. Like what? And we talked about how it's a Hullbreaker horror outlet. Guess what? You can entomb your Hullbreaker at end step, tap your commander, put it on the battlefield, and then execute the loop.
Well, no, you can't entomb it. It has to be milled.
Oh, it has to be milled. Okay.
So you can vampiric tutor it and mill it. Like, oh no, I have to mill it somehow. That's hard.
Yeah. Okay. So apologies for that. I did get a little too ahead of myself.
A little too gung ho.
What you can do is cast your commander, right? Because once again, you need a turn for haste, right? You give yourself the fucking rad counters. You go to your next turn, you upkeep tutor, you mill the thing, or I guess you main phase tutor, right?
No, you would do it. You would do it at upkeep because you want to do it before your pre-combat main phase trigger.
Well, you don't want to draw it though, right?
Oh yeah, sure. It's a I see what you're saying.
But you get priority post.
You would be able to respond to the trigger, yes.
You'd be able to respond to the trigger. That's right.
And I do think it's worth saying. I think that is the biggest. I think that is where the other Sultai outlets don't have this particular problem, which is your opponents don't just die. And that is one of the downsides to this. This is a frequent criticism I have of a lot of Underworld Breach wins is that they don't just cleanly win the game.
No, Born Upon the Wind's like a real card too, right? Like this is very relevant. I agree.
Yeah. And so I think there are a lot of, but I think that one piece doesn't negate the fact that there are 40 trillion layers that you can do with this, right? Like I think the amount of layers you are able to put on it and you're just like cool. Like the fact that you can just go turn 2, play this, give myself the rad counters next turn. Okay. In response, vamp tutor or even worldly tutor for Christ's sake, put this Razaketh into the graveyard or on top of my deck. Boom, boom. I'll get that back. And cool. We doing it. Game. We got the game. Cool.
It also says a graveyard also. Just want to point out. So that casual rad plan that I talked about earlier, where you're just like, I'll mill my opponents a little bit, and then they're like, oh hey, look, they milled their dockside. That's weird.
And that's even where the playing what's it called, the Raul troubleshooter even in this deck, right? Like is so good because you can just like each player mills a card. All right, let's see what we got. What do we got? Like it's just passively good, right?
Yeah. And you know what's one of the craziest interactions that I'm kind of just realizing? If your opponents go to manually brain freeze you out with your commander on board unsummoning sick, if they don't sequence correctly and they say I'm going to mill you out and then I'm going to go for Thoracle, you're like, cool. I'll put a Thoracle onto the battlefield. Yeah, exactly.
In response to your trigger, I'd like to activate the master.
Yeah, this card is super sick. And I feel kind of bad because we're sort of talking about one of my favorite cards in the entire set so early in this episode. So I don't want it to feel like
it's also one of my favorite cards. You're not alone. I saw this. Phoenix and I both saw this get revealed and we were both like, the
fuck? Like straight up, this card is insane. I think it's by far the best card in the set. And genuinely, you've heard me discover several interactions as we are just talking about this deck, right? And once again, so sometimes people ask with Food Chain specifically, right? Like, why play this over X Food Chain deck, right? The answer is always aggro consults, right? Like you can play consult super aggressively, and it's the same reason people play Kazuru Chemo, right? You can at end step be like, sure, I'm going to fire off Demonic Consultation. Hope I hit either my Mist Hollow or my Eternal Scourge, and I'm just going to name Food Chain at end step. And if it's not in the top 6 cards of the library, I exile down, hopefully hit one of my 2 enablers, which is why you usually run 2 if you're going to play with that game plan in mind. And then you go, cool, untap, play Food Chain, win the game.
Yep.
It's 1 card combos in your deck now, right? Yeah. In a deck that doesn't have like a great amount of like it has such toolbox utility that we've been talking about throughout this, right? But like it doesn't have card advantage, right? And so you make up for that in the fact that you can just be like, sure, sick, end step, consult, I win the game.
And this is the other thing, though, that we have talked about a lot on this channel recently is the like 3 different buckets of commanders, right? Where you have the mana advantage, the card advantage, or the the win advantage, the outlet in the command zone. And the master fits into that, right? Where it's very much like a Tivit almost, right? Where Tivit is your win. And so you just play all of these other advantage engines and ways to synergize with it and overlap and all of that. And it's just, they printed a card that was like very much designed in a lab to appeal to specifically us. Like
it's such a good card. I like genuinely am like so excited to get my hands on a copy of this one.
Yeah, same. Next card on our list is a card I'm very interested about why you added it. I'm not very high on this card. It's Liberty Prime Recharged, which is an 8/8 legendary artifact robot that costs 2 generic and Jeskai, has vigilance, trample, and haste, and says whenever it attacks or blocks, sacrifice it unless you pay 2 energy. Then it has an activated ability that costs 2 generic, and you tap it and sacrifice an artifact. You get 2 energy and draw a card. So, okay. I don't see it, but give it to me.
So, I mean, this is an infinite mana outlet in the command zone, right?
Okay.
Because what you do is you play Liberty, sacrifice it to itself, because it says sacrifice an artifact, right?
Right.
You get 2 energy, draw a card. So, Auriok Salvager's outlet, Ice-Crown Scepter outlet, Darklight Extortioner's outlet, etc. Right? Base minimum of what you need for an outlet in the command zone, right? The question then becomes like, why not Jeska Ishai? And my answer to that, or like, why not Brea, right? Like, that's another great question of why not X, Y, and Z card that already exists, right? And the idea for me for this one is, if energy is better because of the new cards printed, this card becomes more interesting, right?
That's fair.
I also think genuinely, if there's a consistent enough energy like engine you have going on in your deck with things like Madison Li and stuff like that, right? This is not a bad manual beatdown deck. And I know, once again, same question for Jeska Ishai, right? I think this is a little bit easier to like sneak through than Jeska Ishai, if I'm being honest. I think that deck is like...
it's also noticeably harder to counter. Which is very important, right? Like,
right. So do I think this is the best commander in the entire world? Absolutely not. Do I think it's going to be strictly better than anything that exists currently? No. Do I think it has some kind of unique synergy that might come up later on? Yeah, absolutely. Also, like, being an artifact sack outlet has some interesting utility with cards like we talked about before, such as, like Ugin's Nexus that you'd kind of mentioned earlier in the episode and stuff like that, which is like, okay, cool, free time walk, that kind of thing. So is it the best card in the world? No. But I think it's, first of all, at least a playable cEDH deck, right? Like, like you can sit down and play this deck and no one's going to be like, oh, this is garbage, why are you doing this, right? Like, it is straight up infinite Jeskai commander outlet, right? So at the very base level is a playable commander. And also, right, like, there are people out there who are like, Liberty Prime is so iconic to the Fallout games. Right. So if you want to play Liberty Prime in cEDH, you can do that. That is a thing you can do, and it's a viable deck, right? Is it the best deck in the world? Probably not.
One of the things I do think that is also very important with the like energy scepter outlet type stuff is it also, like, a great outlet is either Works Marvel, which if you have infinite energy and all that, and you're able to untap it a bunch, either Works Marvel just goes, hey, I'd like to cast your deck. Which is interesting.
I don't think that really does anything here per se. That's more like a Madison Li thing, but I get where you're going.
But yeah, no, that's fair. I'm kind of going through and looking at some of the existing energy cards. That you can do stuff with. I think like there is the like lightning runner shenanigans that you can do, which gives you infinite combats. There is, again, the thing that I think is the most compelling is probably Dynavolt Tower. Just being the infinite ability to just deal damage to targets.
Yeah, it's the cleanest Hullbreaker Horror outlet too.
Absolutely. And so I think that gives you some good stuff to look at. But I mean, it's also interesting. We'll be interested to see what we get in Modern Horizons, because Modern Horizons will probably be breaking that mechanic wide the fuck open. So we will see how that goes. All right, so on to our next commander. This is Preston Garvey. Minuteman is a 4/4 human soldier that costs 2 generic and Naya. And says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a green aura enchantment token named Settlement attached to up to 1 target land you control. It has enchant land, and enchanted land has add 1 mana of any color. Whenever Preston attacks, untap each enchanted permanent you control. So, this is kind of interesting. This is a little bit like what's the enchantment? Estrid. Yeah, I've had very Estrid like. What are your thoughts on Preston here, Ian?
Yeah, so like on a base level, right? The basic level of Preston is that it is an outlet with 5 mana worth of enchanted permanents and aggravated assault, right? That's all you need to be able to go off with that, right? So if you can basically get to a point where whenever Preston attacks, it untaps enchanted permanents that can generate up to 3 generic, 2 red, you take infinite combats, right? There's also several different versions of that that also work accordingly, right? And so like there's a lot of really, interesting stuff that sort of plays out in these colors. It's sort of like a Naya combat enchantress deck, right? Like there's a lot of different ways you can take it. You can go like the whole Dockside route. I think there's kind of an interesting, like, okay, if you're going to play a bunch of auras, you sort of do feed Dockside a bunch. So you could take it like a Collector Roof route and then sort of make it this like combat enchantress Staxy deck that has this outlet, which I think is actually pretty unique, pretty enticing, right? Like if you're going to play a bunch of enchantments, you can play things like, oh my God, what's the name of the card? Serra Sanctum, right? Which is like if you put one of these on Serra Sanctum or a Gaia's Cradle, right? You're suddenly untapping those every single turn. You're doubling your mana production. It does suck a little bit that your commander has to like be the one attacking and risk itself in combat, but like, there's some interesting stuff that you can do here. Unfortunately, we're not in the colors for Stasis, right? Which would be like insane with this card.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that, but like you can still play like your Winter Orbs and stuff like that if you're already playing oofs, and you can play
Static Orb. Honestly, is probably the best one here.
Static Orb. Yep, exactly. So like it's a very unique stack. It's very commander dependent, unfortunately. But
that's not a bad thing necessarily. Yeah. Like I think there's some cool stuff that you can do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also like, it's nice that it is a stacks deck that also has a 2-card combo, right?
Right.
Like that is
it's a clear win.
2-card combo, right? But
well, and it's also noticeable that it is easy to assemble in the colors, right? You're not in a color pairing where it's like difficult to get that put together. And I think that is very important.
Yeah, so I think it's fun. I think it's a unique commander, and I think someone could spend some energy making this deck and
some like physical energy.
Yeah. That's fun.
Next card on our list is Shaun, father, not farther. Why did I say farther? Father Shaun. Of Synths It is a fart never changes, man. It is a 3/4 human scientist that costs 3 generic, a blue and a red, and says whenever you attack, you may create a tapped in attacking token that's a copy of target attacking a legendary creature you control other than Shaun, except it's not legendary, and it's a synth artifact creature in addition to its other types. Jesus, that's a lot of text.
Yeah.
When Shaun leaves the battlefield, exile all synth tokens you control. This immediately makes me think of like the Master Multiplied a little bit.
Yes, except
not exactly
itself.
Right.
This is where it gets interesting, right? Whereas the Master Multiplied gets out of hand because what happens is you make multiple copies of the Master Multiplied, right? Whereas this commander is just basically saying every single time you go to combat, take your best legendary, and now you've got a free copy of that legendary, right? I do like one big up for me on this card, and what makes it kind of playable for me is the fact that it says whenever you attack, not whenever Shaun attacks.
Right.
So specifically, you can play it like, for example, like Delina Wild Mage is a really interesting commander to pair up with this one, right? Because you go to combat, you make a copy of Delina, which can make a copy of something, and then you just like,
and you're off to the races.
You don't get the when you attack triggers, right? But also, if you notice in the text, these copies stay, right?
Yep.
So like,
and they're non-legendary, so you can make more non-legendary copies of those. Man, that really hurts my head. I haven't had nearly enough caffeine for this.
It's a textbook to read, truly.
Yes.
The biggest downside is that you have to protect Shaun no matter what, because the synths all go away if you lose Shaun.
If somebody uses a removal spell on it, they have effectively board wiped.
Right. So you want, isn't a copy?
If a copy,
target? Okay.
Yeah, like
no, I was gonna say, because if it didn't say the word target, Kira the Great Glass Spinner would be insane in this deck,
right?
But it does say target, so it doesn't work. But you want your Spell Skites, you want your Lightning Greaves, and then I think you just genuinely jam this full of like super high impact legends in blue-red. And this might not be like that might not be the thing, but like it feels like a deck that can snowball out of control very hard. And like if you play a good tempo game and just play a bunch of like, once again, impactful blue-red legendary permanents, it feels like it can get out of hand really fast, right? Like, yeah, I mean, just like doing crazy things like double Lannery Storms, double Malcolm, stuff like that. Like you can have multiple Niv Mizzets on the battlefield, just like, do some dumb stuff, right? So, it's cute for sure. Like, don't get me wrong, that is definitely not like the most busted cEDH deck we're going to talk about today, right? Sure. But I think like it does enough snowballing stuff that I could see it just having this weird like get out of control fast mentality, and then people are like, wait, I didn't even really understand how I started losing to this deck. It also like you can get under rule laws really easily. You can play things like Damping Sphere or Arcane Laboratory. You can play Blood Moons and Back to Basics and just be like, yeah, sure, I'll beat you down with big blue-red legendary creatures.
Is it Blue Moon is back on the menu, boys?
I didn't say that. Don't quote me on it.
I read between the lines.
I do find it very funny that you can do like with this and 3 more pips, you can just start doing like Keranos beatdowns. Which is like hot. Like that is like that feels like old school cEDH. You know what I mean? Like that's
Get in, boys. It's 2017.
Yeah, literally. Like it's Keranos Blue Moon in fucking that's the most like Zoomer version of 2017 cEDH I can think of. It's just like really my new Fallout card is allowing me to play 2017's Blue Moon.
Oh man, that's amazing. Well, let's move out of the commanders and let's look at just some creatures that we think would be decent in the 99. And the first one here it's still legendary, but it's MacCready, Lamplight Mayor. It is a 1/3 human advisor that costs a white and a black and says whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less attacks, it gains Skulk until end of turn. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater attacks you, its controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this is interesting card with Tymna in Crom very specifically. It makes this is, in my opinion, a better addition to Tymna Crom than Delny. Personally, I think this has a bigger impact. Will end up having a bigger impact on your games in Tymna Crom than Delny will. I don't think you play either of them, but I think this would be more impactful. This is a card that makes your Tymnas better and makes your opponent's Croms worse. In the most simplest of terms.
Yeah. So my problem is, right, I read this and go, wait, this is just way worse than Delny. So now we have a very
different No, I think this is much better than Delny, but mostly because of the fact it's a 1/3. It's easier to get it down on turn 2, so it's easier to curve into your Tymna plan than it is to do with Delny, and it also gives you passive disadvantage for your opponents on playing or on attacking with their Croms, specifically attacking you. So it definitely has some passive advantage. I don't know that either are Tymna Crom staples, but I do think that this is a thing that is pretty good in like Tymna decks overall.
Yeah, I'm trusting on this one. That's all I got.
Listen, it at minimum means your Tymna always gets through, right? Like, unless they're blocking with their 1/1s or their dorks, which people don't really play anymore, or their Ragavans, which if you're blocking with your Ragavan, then fine. Like,
yeah, I don't know.
We'll see. I think this has legs. I don't know how many, but it definitely has at minimum one leg. So next card on the list, Sam hasn't gotten me our new bit thing yet. So time for Cal's Deranged Tivit Takes. And for this bit this week, we have Piper Wright, Publick Reporter. It's a 1/2 human detective that costs a generic and a blue and says whenever Piper deals combat damage to a player, investigate that many times. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So this is just like another way to do the whole Tivit thing in Tivit. It's Tivit 2 Electric Boogaloo, but in the 99. Maybe this isn't deranged, but I think this is a very, very good Tivit card.
My only criticism of the card is the fact that it does not have any evasion.
Yes,
that is the one
100%.
thing I do not like about this card. The opposite part of that is that I do think it's very interesting. I genuinely think, like, if you know you can connect with this card, it's actually pretty solid, right? Like,
it fixes some of the low player board state issues that you have in those Tivit matchups, right?
I do agree with that. I also think it's like it doesn't suck in the early game.
Yes.
I don't think it's great in the early game. My problem with a lot of these cards with Tivit that we've been talking about lately are, like, they're so good when Tivit's on the board, but getting Tivit on the board is the biggest problem I have with modern Tivit, right? And like that's so
thing. Weird, like, because I just don't have that issue.
Yeah, well, you keep playing at Star Cities, which is a very different environment.
I mean, when I play online, resolving Tivit isn't the issue. When I play like even at like the Magic Cons, right, over the weekend, resolving Tivit isn't the issue. Right. It's the politics of like making sure that you find the right window to resolve a Tivit. Right. And that's kind of more of the issue than anything else, because the big thing is
that's what I mean, right? Like it's the fact that you have to have a window to do it, right? Like it is a window card, right? And like if your window cards are great because usually it means that they're so scary that the impact they need a window for, right? Which is fair. But that being said, I also want a window card to win me the game more so than just like provide me a bit of advantage, which it feels like Tivit does until it wins, right? But like I don't want my windows to be things that I still need a second window to capitalize upon, right? Like
I think the benefit of this, though, is that you really don't need your commander for it to be good, right? It just kind of does its own thing and then also synergizes with your commander, which I think is the benefit of it. Having the ability to generate some clues on its own, as well as, even if you're at a point where you're just like drawing some cards, putting a +1/+1 counter on an Esper Sentinel is nothing, right? Like it is, that is legitimately a good thing to do in some portions of the game. So you can draw a card, make your Esper Sentinel bigger. That's not a bad place to be.
It does say a creature. That's not bad.
Yeah. So you can put a +1/+1 anywhere, just by cracking a clue. So I think there is some upside to it as just a passive value engine that also synergizes really well with your commander. As with all of these, I kind of run into the issue of, well, what am I taking out for this? Right. And that kind of tends to be the general issue with it. because if anything, I have become more and more sold on Shieldred in the 99 than I have been on taking it out, especially after the printing of Trouble in Pairs. The card has gotten significantly better. So it's one of those things where I don't know what I'm going to try it in the spot of.
Right.
But it has the DNA of a card that should be good here. And I think that is enough for me to give it a shot. Maybe I'm cutting another land. Who knows? Like I might be down to 27 lands into it, but we'll see. Moving on to the next card in the list. This is Armory Paladin. It's a 3/3 human knight that costs 1 generic and 2 and a red and a white. It has trample, and whenever you cast an aura or equipment spell, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until the end of your next turn. So this is a pretty interesting card from the perspective of the fact that this does a lot of kind of passive value generation for a lot of different decks. So what are your thoughts on this overall?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting piece, right? I don't know, like, that there's that perfect aura equipment deck that I can say this 100% goes in, right? But it is card advantage in colors that normally don't get it, right?
I know there are people who are going to bring up Arden Crom to me, and I'm just want to tell you that that deck doesn't play enough auras and equipment to justify a slot. That's not how that works.
I think like Cole is a commander. I'm
Cole would be good with this.
Yeah. And like stuff akin to that, right? Like that's more so where my brain goes with these types of things.
Absolutely. Next card on our list is Boom Scrapper. It is a 1/1 human soldier that costs a generic black and a red. And it says when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you lose 1 life and create a junk token. And a junk token, by the way, is an artifact with tap, sacrifice it, exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn, and you can only activate it as a sorcery. Second ability on this card is whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Boom Scrapper or Boomer Scrapper. So this is for all the old heads out there, all the boomers, here's a great new card for you. This is pretty good with stuff like, I really appreciate the head nod. That's really all I wanted. I needed some acknowledgement of the bad joke.
I'm not proud of you, but I'm here.
But this is like an Obnixilis or a Prosper card, right? Like it kind of does both those things.
Yep, that's literally it. I think junk tokens are actually pretty good. Strong. Yeah. I think they're going to be underestimated. I think they're quite interesting, quite powerful, and we will see where they end up, right? Like there's a number of cards that we're probably going to talk about in the next couple of minutes that and I think this is our first junk token conversation, right? So,
yes, believe so.
The junk tokens are one of the most powerful artifact tokens that I think we've ever come up against, right? I think they're the closest thing to treasures, to be honest, that has ever existed. And treasures, as we all hopefully should be aware, are fucking bonko bananas, right? So like
actually gold are the most powerful because they don't need to tap to activate. Which is why we have treasures, because they've realized really fucking quick that gold is way too powerful.
But that was like on 4 cards, right? Like, so it doesn't really like but yeah, so I think it's a lot better than clues in cEDH specifically, right? Because the time it costs 2 mana for that permanence of cards is not like the conversion we're trying to make in cEDH. We are trying to go fast. We're trying to exile stuff. Trying to be like, I paid 0 mana into this thing, crack it, go this turn, right? The downside of it only being able to be cracked at sorcery speed is very real. Is it until your next turn or is it this turn?
This turn.
Okay, so like that is huge, right? I do think that is a big part of the downside of junk, right? So you do want it to be in much more proactive strategies, right? You're not like trying to crack and hit a counterspell, right? Because that's not going to, well, I mean, you can.
But that's also the benefit of these things, right? Is you're able to stockpile these things. And so when you get to the turn where you're like, okay, I think I'm going to try and go for it. Yeah. You have this accumulation of junk that you're able to just go burr. And that's
the biggest downside for me is the fact that kind of we like the idea of stockpiling these, and you can't crack them in instant speed, and Dockside is a card, right? Like that is the biggest downside by far for these cards, which is unfortunate, but I think it is, still worth it, like pretty aggressively, right? Like worst case scenario, all your stuff is cantripping, right? Like that is pretty sick. So and also the fact that this card is just like a really decent grind engine, back to like the card itself, not just junk tokens. Like one comes in, basically replaces itself as the 3-drop, right? It gives you a card right away. You don't have to crack it that turn. You probably save it till the next turn. By the time you want to go to combat with it, you're already cracking one, sending it out into combat. So it's a 2/2. You probably get a free card for the turn. You get another junk token for the turn afterwards. Not to mention, if you are, doing Dockside stuff, this thing becomes like a 7/7/8/8, like comically
really fast,
right? Yeah.
This is the cards we were talking about with like what was the card we talked about with Murders of Karlov Manor that was good in the like Dargo decks, the crime novelist. This feels very similar to that in a way. Yeah, where like you put this in a Dargo deck and it ends up filling a similar role, right? Where you're able to, my Dargo, maybe I don't want to, my Dargo got caught somewhere, or there's a Draneth out, but I have the Greater Good, and I have this, and I have a Dockside and a bunch of way to make a bunch of mana, and cool, well, perfect. I can just make this really big and draw a bunch of cards.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about how like good junk is with Corvold too, right? Like
extraordinarily good.
Like any junk cards with Corvold are kind of fucking insane, and I would not be surprised if we see like red black X, these sort of like junky sacrificed artifact flip bunch of stuff. Like there are some engines you can make with all of these cards that just like, I think it takes a very smart person to assemble the right version of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But as soon as you do, this is like just off the wall, right? Like just full. I think like, kind of similar to what we saw with like, there was that like sacrifice Corvold deck that was playing like, Pilferer and stuff like that, right? Like there's going to be decks like that have that grimy jund, this thing dies and then that triggers
this
6
thing
things,
happens,
and then
like
just full grind jund. And I think that is a archetype that is underexplored and getting a lot of tools over the past few months. It just, where does it fit in the format? How does it hang with all these things? These are all really good questions,
Right. Yeah, 100%. But I'm excited to see what this goes. Again, junk, very good. This feels really good in like the Dargo Ikra decks. Again, like you said, in Corvold, like those types of decks feel like they are going to do really good with it. And again, also feels very, very strong in Prosper and in Obnixilis. So
I'm very ready for Nathan Jones in the comments to be like, Dargo Timna! Dargo Timna! He always does.
Next card on the list is Nick Valentine, Private Eye. This is a 2/2 artifact creature synth detective that costs a 2 generic and a blue, and says it can't be blocked except by artifact creatures. And whenever Nick Valentine or another artifact creature you control dies, you may investigate. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to get this out of here. Yes, fun fact, this does just go like create infinite death triggers with March of the Machine, where it makes a blue token because of March of the Machine, enters the battlefield, immediately dies, and then just
that's kind of hot.
It's something. It keeps doing that. The issue is with that combo is you are in mono blue.
The game, right?
Well, it's not that you draw the game. You have to have an outlet of one part of it, but you do have to draw or have some sort of a when this happens, X happens thing.
Right.
So like you need an Altar of the Brood, or you need something along those lines to make that work, and a way to tutor with it, which is why I don't have this in as a commander potentially, because I think you could do that, but I think it's a little too difficult to make everything work that I don't have it there. Where I do think this is again very interesting. I
think it's also like not just March of the Machines, because there's actually kind of like a interesting. Now that you bring this up, the idea of like, okay, well now you look at something like I think it's like Titanium Song or something like that makes all artifacts equal to their mana value, right? So it's like sort of treasure hate on top of the fact that it's this combo piece with this one card, which is like there's some funk you can throw on this stuff.
There's some stuff that you can do with this. My biggest thing that I like with this is, again, I do think that this is decent in as an exploratory card in Tivit. Again, not something that I'm super like, oh my gosh, this is great. But anything that does a thing and investigates is pretty good in Tivit, generally speaking. I don't know if it's necessarily my build of Tivit that it would be good in, but I see what this has the ability to do.
If you are playing the Mirkwood Bats version of Tivit.
Yes. But I mean, that's the thing, right? Is I think that this is a way to it is part of a 2-card combo. So I think that it is at least worth acknowledging that, and that there is some amount of inherent strength in that, because it is just, you can't really react to that. There's not a whole lot you can do to it. It's not really putting triggers onto the stack a whole lot. It's just like, okay, I make a creature. It's literally, you have the ability to respond to a thing died and a thing is coming back, or is being created, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it just happens, but that is an interesting thing that can happen. I don't know how good it is, but I think it's interesting. And again, as I've said many times on this podcast, I like to highlight interesting. So
I love that. Yeah, no, I am fully with you. Interesting. I don't know if it's good, but once again, like, some of the stuff we talked about there, right, where it's like, it's, when you get these layers of like, oh, well, yeah, it is this sort of like weird stall out the game combo if things go wrong, right? But it also is like, yeah, but if I can also combine that with artifact hate for my opponent's decks, it's like, okay, yeah, now this is like, it's a little jazzy, a little funky. Throw some riffs on there, and we might have something going. Yeah,
it's got a little bit of flavor to it.
Yeah.
Next card on our list is Synth Eradicator. It's a 3/3 synth soldier that costs 2 generic and a red, and has haste, and says whenever it attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may get 2 energy counters. If you don't, you may play that card this turn. Then you can tap it, pay 3 energy, and Synth Eradicator deals 3 damage to any target. So this is kind of in that we're getting a bunch of new energy cards list, and this is probably one of the better just passive energy cards that we have.
Well, that's what I'm saying. This card is like not bad in general, right? It's a hasty 3/3 that draws a card ish. Right, like I think you play this in Prosper. They're already playing Lelia, the Blade Forge, or whatever that card's name is. Right, like this is the fact that it has haste. I think is really big. And yeah, so like, oh no, I hit a couple lands in a row after I already made land drops. Now it's a passive lightning bolt that I have for removal. Or playing an energy deck, it's 3 mana removal that then later becomes card draw for my turns. Right, like it's just there's a lot of It does stuff, and I think that's kind of interesting. Like it does enough passive things where I'm like, okay, well, it does this thing and does this thing, huh? Well, okay, but it does that too, right? Like it's just like it's anytime a card opens a bunch of options in its base play patterns, I think that is exceptional to talk about, right?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you at all, and I think it does exceptionally well. Especially in those Liberty Prime and in those Dr. Madison Li sort of decks where you're able to, even Prosper, where you have an ability to just kind of continually make that energy grow. And I think that's the biggest thing that is worth noting is the second half of that doesn't immediately happen unless you have 3 energy and it only makes 2. It does need it takes a little bit longer to get the stockpile going. But I think that it is certainly an interesting card that will be at minimum playable in 2 decks, maybe more. Next card we got here is 3 Dog, Galaxy News DJ. He is a 1/5 human bard. Also, the fun fact for those of you who have played Fallout 3, this is the only character in the game that is part of the main story that you actually can kill for some reason. And also, if you kill him, good luck finishing that game. 3 Dog costs a generic red and a white, is a human bard, and says whenever you attack, you may pay 2 generic and sacrifice an aura attached to 3 Dog. When you sacrifice an aura this way, for each other attacking creature you control, create a token that's a copy of that aura attached to that creature. It's kind of, this is a little bit like Stang almost, right? Where it kind of makes a bunch of copies of stuff.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this card?
I don't know how, but this is broken. I don't have the knowledge of auras. Like, it's not an archetype I know that well, right? But like, there is no way that the templating on this card is not fundamentally busted in some way, right? Like, base level, you have like 4 creatures, you go to combat, you pay 2 mana, and you make an all that glitters sacrifice, and then all of your creatures are getting +4/+4 plus any other artifacts or enchantments you have in the battlefield, right? Like a base level, that's the kind of stupid shit it does if you're trying to slow down the game and do that stuff, which I think is not that hard to do, right? So like you make, but the biggest problem, right? Auras are super easy to blow out, right? So you like put an aura on 3 Dog, and then you go to combat, and then in response to combat, your opponent's like, cool, remove 3 Dog, and you're like, oh no, my entire game plan, right? But on the other hand, I can easily see a lot of scenarios where you're like playing a bunch of stacks creatures, you put 1 aura on 3 Dog, you move to combat, and then you're like, boom, activate ability, something broken, fill in the blank here. Once again, don't know what it is. It's something though. There is something here with this commander. Like it might be
an on fire garbage can.
It could be an on fire garbage can. And also, once again, the fact that it says whenever you attack, that is that smart templating, that it is meant to do something good.
Yep.
It's a 3-drop. I don't think that's egregious by any means. It's a 1/5 body, which I think is good because it means like actually like a braid and stuff like that, which is not, huge in cEDH. There's swords, there's bounce spells, there's all that shit out there, which is fine. But I think it's enough. There is enough out there, and I don't think it doesn't target, right? No. So like you can have like
you put it on each other attacking creature you control.
Right. So you can play things like Greater Oromancy and stuff like that, and then like that stops any interaction for this part of the process, except for that initial part where they like go to blow out 3 Dog as you put the aura on, right? But like these are all good things. They're all good pieces. And I think like part of the brewing process in cEDH is accepting the fact that you don't always get every interaction. But what I can recognize is patterns, right? And the patterns that are written down on the text of this card are powerful patterns.
Right.
So my shot in the dark is that this is enough correct, like enough check boxes where I'm like, once again, I would have to do a deep dive before I feel valid in saying I know exactly how this deck is.
What Ian's saying is that he thinks Boros Boggles is going to be replacing Winota.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Thank you for fixing it.
It's okay. I'm just over here as your interpreter. It's kind of like that anger interpreter that Key and Peele used to do for Obama.
Good classic.
I'm your batshit interpreter or whatever.
You're my brew interpreter.
Next card on our list is Veronica, Dissident Scribe. Veronica is a 3/3 that costs 2 generic and a red and is a human artificer rogue with menace. And it says whenever she attacks, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And second ability, whenever you discard 1 or more non-land cards for the first time each turn, create a junk token. Hey, there's that card type again. What are your thoughts on this card? This is pretty good 99 inclusion in stuff like, say, Obnixilis and Prosper and
I don't know about Obnixilis, but yes, Prosper, absolutely. There is enough of these red pieces now, and we're going to talk about another card later that's fitting all in this pattern. But
the other one that we're going to talk about is nuts.
Yes, right. And so we're talking about like Inti and like stuff like that. That's all this like red discard exile cast stuff, right? Like it's like this once again, more words that all make sense together. And it's like, how long until one of these is fucking broken, right? Like there is something in this combination of cards where it's like, it's not as easy as being like Thoracle plus Consult 2-card combo, right? But like when you layer enough consistent effects of certain effects over and over on top of one another, at some point you got to recognize that like, yeah, the synergy is so clean that it doesn't necessarily need to be the best thing in the room, but it's the best thing in the room because of how often and how clean these things work in unison, right? So
it turns out when there is a pile of layers that makes a tower, and towers are, I've heard, good structures or something. I don't know.
Yeah. This also feels like it's very close to being a Winota card. I don't know that it is, but like, it's close. It's not probably there, but yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I don't know.
Honestly, I'd probably rather play Synth Eradicator than this card, but still.
Yeah. Anyhow, next card. Watchful Radstag. This is a 2/2.
This is an Ian card for sure.
This is very much an Ian card. That costs 2 generic and a green. Has Evolve, which if you're unfamiliar with Evolve, it's whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And it also says whenever Watchful Radstag evolves, create a token that's a copy of it. Okay, I'm not going to roll my eyes entirely, right? Like I get it. I get it. You get a power, you get an army of dudes. Oko would be proud of you, Ian. You're doing your best Oko impression.
Yeah.
Where do you see this specifically? That
I think this is actually one of the best stacks payoffs of all time.
Okay.
It's, I shouldn't say of all time, like in recent history, specifically because it is one of those cards that just consistently produces a multiplicative effect, right? So you have one Radstag, a 3-drop comes in, 3-power creature. Jetmir is also a really interesting place to look at this card, right? Because every one of these comes in, buffs the power of the creatures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So like as a bigger thing comes in, you make another Radstag, right? This is not limited to once per turn, unless I'm mistaken by the templating.
Nope.
Yeah, no, just it happens always, right? So like straight up,
when it evolves.
Okay. Huh?
When it evolves. And it has a cascading effect, right?
Right. So like straight up on the very base level, if you go, hey, I'm going to play Radstag. Next turn, I play a 3-power creature. Next turn, I play a 4-power creature. You now suddenly have 5 creatures, right? That's and also the new Radstags that come in as
also
the 2-power creatures, right? So then by the time that comes out again, right? And this is why I'm saying it's a stacks payoff, right? Because it's not something that is immediately going to be like A+B, I win the game, right? But what it is doing is saying like, as I go to control the later part of the game, every time I play a larger creature or something that has greater than 2 power, suddenly this is just like, and one more of these, and one more.
Or 2 toughness. Don't forget the toughness part of that, baby.
Yeah, the toughness too. Part. Yeah, absolutely. So like, it's
like, I mean, hell, like you play a Drannith and it triggers this, right? Like
right.
Or a Dauntless Dismantler and it triggers this.
Dauntless Dismantler, Drannith Magistrate. You play Archon of Emeria, right? Like all of these cards are going to start triggering these things. And if you notice, I just listed, and Cal just listed some of the most playable stacks effects in our format, right? Dauntless Dismantler plus this card is like absolutely crazy, right? Like it's that secondary trigger like you talked about. So thank you for bringing that one up, right? Straight up, you go turn 3 mana Radstag, untap, play land drop, 4 mana. Now I go Drannith, Dauntless. I have 5 creatures on the board, 2 of them being 4 power, or one of them being 4 power, one of them being 3 power, and then the other 2 being 2 drops, I believe. Exactly.
I will reiterate, I have not had enough caffeine today to do this math. But you have. I will say that you have. I'll say you have enough. You have enough elks to make an Oko happy.
Exactly. So it's not the most powerful card in the world. It's not the cleanest card in the world. But for a single 3 mana investment, it starts to just completely get out of hand, right? And like that's the part of this card that is very attractive to me. Is like it is just going to continually start snowballing. I like Jetmir is a perfect example of where this place is good, right? Because every time you get one of these, you are now buffing your entire team. And then everything that comes down is now increasing that buff as well. And so, like, yes, the stags also get their power buffed, right? So it's not like the cleanest way of going about it. But if your entire team's getting buffed, every creature that normally would have a greater power, greater toughness is also getting buffed anyways, right? So like there are so many layers to this. But the point is, stag is very good if the game is long. As the longer the game goes, the stronger this card is and the easier it is to turn the corner. And the fact that it is not just a power buff, but the fact that it is a power and toughness buff is also huge in stacks of your games, because those are the times where you need things that are going to be able to push through damage very easily. And that's what this card is going to be doing.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie, I zoned out there for a second.
It's okay. I like almost straight up want to play this or test it in Kinnan. Like, because of all of the like I know it's weird. I know it's really weird, but like all of the creatures you are flipping into in Kinnan, just like you are almost guaranteed to trigger this always, right? Like any creature you flip into Kinnan. I think that might be bad. I think that might be too deep in the sauce, right?
That's like, a little too deep in the sauce.
I think for sure, 99% sure I agree with you.
I think I would rather play the Chimera than this, but.
That's fair. That's super fair. Once again, I want to try it. This is like this is me in experimental mode, right? I want to see like because like maybe I'm super deep in there, right? But like the idea of this plus coma is like so funny to me. Like
yeah. I gotta be honest, that gave me a headache. So
I get it.
Yeah. No worries, man. No worries. I also was at the con this weekend, realized that you can counter a Perplexing Chimera with a Swan Song, which made me hate that card more. So, maybe this is the new truth. So,
yeah, that's the one thing is the Swan Song is why Radstag is better than Chimera.
That's why it's better.
And honestly, if people go down in the comments and tell me I'm smoking crack, that's fine. I just think this card
is actually actively smoking crack. You can't see it on the screen, but it's off the screen. This is actually an intervention. Next card on the list is Elder Owyn Lyons, whatever. It's a 3/3 human knight that costs 2 generic, a white and a blue. Artifacts you control have ward 1. And whenever he enters the battlefield or dies, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Artifacts have ward 1, baby. I don't have a lot to say about this. We could probably cut it, but I just like it gives stuff ward. And when I put the list together earlier, I was like, oh, that's cool. That was it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
okay. No, we're keeping it.
Yeah, that was the logic of it gives stuff ward. That's cool.
You didn't care about the ETB?
ETB's fine. It's fine. The ETB's fine. Okay. It does do things specifically with LED and Jeweled Lotus, but what I really care about is that artifacts have ward 1.
It is worth noting.
I need to go get a Coke, man.
Yeah, for sure. I do agree that you do need that. This is worth noting that this is an infinite with Displacer Kitten and 2 artifacts that can sacrifice themselves to make mana, basically, or at least one that can sacrifice to make mana. With
Displacer Kitten and Lotus Petal.
Yeah, well, and you need one other card.
You do?
Yes, because you go to Lotus Petal will be on the stack.
So it literally just this and fucking
you need Jeweled Lotus, LED, Lotus Petal. Basically you need Lotus Petal, LED, and another artifact that sacrifices itself. Period. That you can cost efficiently play. So you can do like a bauble, right? Like it doesn't matter.
You only need 2. 2 though is the point. Right.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, you need Lotus Petal and one of those, or LED and one of those, right? Like, yes.
Darn, I guess I'll just play Mishra's Bauble. What will I do?
Yeah.
Oh no, I'll play this good card.
But I think one of the things that we maybe missed in this dialogue is that it does give artifacts ward 1.
It does give artifacts ward. The real the real juice of this is that it gives it our word one.
The real squeeze on this bad slab of meat for sure.
I don't know if you noticed, but over the past like 20 minutes, my brain just went.
Was it the Radstag math? I deeply apologize.
No,
if it was
the Radstag math definitely made my eyes glaze over and my brain turn into jello. But yeah, it was before that. It was my brain just kind of went. But also, no, I genuinely speaking, when I did add this to this, I did see the second part of it, but I mostly was like, oh, cool. Artifacts have ward one. That was a big a part of the math of the math of why I added it to the list was artifacts of ward one. And I think ward is pretty cool. So yeah. That's it. That's the pitch. Next card. Is Rose, Cutthroat Raider. It is a 3/2 legendary artifact creature robot that costs 2 generic and 2 red. Has first strike and raid at the end of combat on your turn. If you attacked this turn, create a junk token for each opponent you attacked. Second ability is
Tim the red.
Yes. Actually, I have a better comparison to this. But whenever you would sacrifice a junk, add red mana to your mana pool. This is better professional Facebreaker in certain decks.
Okay.
It is better. Let me rephrase that. Hold on. I can do better.
Yep.
I have drank a couple sips of Coke, so I'm coming to.
Okay.
It is in some decks better than professional Facebreaker. There's the grammar that works.
Okay. Yes.
Specifically the fact that one of the big downsides with professional Facebreaker, right, is it makes you choose between, do I want the mana or do I want the card? And this just says, why not both, babe? I think that is what kind of sets it apart. It does, of course, do the limiting to the red mana, but oh, darn, I only have red mana. If only I could fix it somehow.
It does feel very prospery, right? Like this feels obviously insane in that deck. I think this actually might be one of the strongest mono red commanders printed in a long time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
As far as like with the actual ability to grind a little bit.
I like this more than I like even something like Bergie, honestly, as a commander. TBH.
Yeah.
Like,
no,
I think
I can actually fuck with that. If there's ever so what's really interesting to me about this card is if you have a token doubler and can profitably attack all 3 opponents, you go infinite combats with this with aggravated assault, but in the sense that you just are doing it until
because it happens at the end of combat on your turn.
Can't you activate aggravated assault in your main phase?
I have to relook up aggravated assault. Untap all creatures you control. If it's a main phase, there's an additional combat. Oh, okay. Never mind. Don't listen to me.
So you go infinite in the sense that you like exile your entire deck, right? Like that is
sure.
You know,
sure.
I guess you actually also just can continue activating them because you don't need a deck with
right. You will only make 3 junk a turn cycle though. But if you have something like a Veronica,
that's a token doubler. Yeah,
that too. Then you are able to just kind of keep making the boys. So the fun thing with this is that it also, and part of my favorite part about why I think this is better in some decks than professional Facebreaker is it doesn't really give a shit if you dealt combat damage or not. It's did you attack? Sweet. And that I think is one of the things that makes it better in the right deck. And got to make sure I have that addendum, even if it's like super small fine print. I do think it is important to point that out, that in the right deck, this is better than professional Facebreaker because of the fact that it doesn't give a shit if you connect it or not. It's, did you attack with an Ornithopter? Cool beans, dude.
You don't even have to go into double things. No. You can literally just, there's actually a couple ways you can pop off of this. Karkland Ironworks. It does not actually say how you need to sacrifice the junk. You don't actually need to activate the junk. So KCI plus this card plus 2 attackers goes infinite with aggravated assault.
Are we building a KCI deck? I want to build a KCI deck, Ian.
Yeah, Crime Novelist plus this card also goes infinite. I have a
copy of KCI around here somewhere, and I want to use it. I've had it for years, and I've nothing to play it in.
I really find it funny that you and I are both like, yes, we both want this card in the set review because we independently put this on here.
Yes.
And also I'm now discovering multiple combos with it live on the air.
Yeah. No, it was one of those things where I was like, oh, this is just a really good 99 card, but I'm actually like, maybe this is a good commander. Whatever. This is the creature section, whatever. Fuck off. This is my podcast. This is our podcast, and we'll do whatever the fuck we want with it. Audience member and potential patron subscriber. Go check out the Patreon. Make sure to subscribe. We love you.
Nice. Good save.
Good save. We got it. It's a first pass. I
actually really like this. Like, you want to build this next week?
Very, very, very much so. Actually, very deeply. Cool. No, I actually think this is really sweet. I think it is. And again, I do like it a lot as a commander, and I do want to build this. I do think this is going to be at its best in a deck like Prosper, in a deck like Ob Nixilis, where those are the type of places where you're going to be able to extract a lot of value out of this. I think this will make a fun commander. And I think if anything,
I also think like the archetype of red with like the words red all capitalized, like big stupid burr red, is so underexplored in our format. Like, you saw that with
I thought you were going to say it's a funny joke, and I think that we are naming this deck RED, and what we need to do is it needs to be R-E.E. And we need to figure out what that acronym stands for in between now and next week.
If you guys have any suggestions, comments,
please comment. And you got to comment right away because we usually record earlier in the week, so you got to comment really fast for us to see it. So
that is actually very valid. Yeah, you guys are like,
we'll know if you actually listen to the podcast because we're an hour and 40 fucking minutes into this thing.
But yeah, no, I think this commander is actually like really interesting. And like, once again, we saw at the Boil, right? 17th place, we had that Kiki Jiki deck that was like playing a lot of these like turbo red.
My brain is so fried. Right? You said the Boil, and my brain immediately was just like, please don't talk to me about that fucking vehicle converter thing. The transformer that everybody gets all wet over.
No, not Slicer. No,
thank you.
I'm talking about the Boil. No, that was the California tournament that one showed up at.
I don't know, man. Listen. Anyways, they all have fucking weird ass names. I never know where any of them are at.
Mono red is underplayed, is my point. Okay. We're seeing it with Atali. We saw it with Kijiki. I think that like mono red, turbo speed, stupid bad breach lines, doesn't matter, play my seething song decks are like actually kind of a thing that is very underexplored. And I'm excited to hopefully see if there's other brewers out there who agree with me, because I'm super down to like try and push red really hard right now.
Well, like that is minimum. I agree with you here. So
yeah,
and it has nothing to do with the fact that I get to play KCI.
No, I love KCI too.
KCI is one of those cards that it just scratches a very specific itch.
Oh, same.
And I love the card. But next card on the list is Synth Infiltrator. It is a artifact creature synth that is a 0/0, costs 3 generic, 2 blue, has improvise. So if you're new to the format, improvise is very similar to Whir of Invention, where your artifacts can help cast the spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activated mana abilities pays for 1 generic of the cost. So you may have Synth Infiltrator enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's a synth artifact creature in addition to its other types. So the reason I added this to the list is this is up there with the Phyrexian Metamorph in the cheap ass artifact copy creature spell categories of cards. That I said that the most obtuse way possible, but yeah, I mean, like, it generally will cost you like 2 fucking mana to cast this, which is pretty sick. especially in a thing like Tivit, where you've got a bunch of fucking clues lying around and you're like, man, I wonder if I could tap these to do something more useful than sit here and look pretty. Like Synth Infiltrator, again, it's not great, but I think it's good. I think it kind of is in the like flush duplicate Phyrexian metamorph like category of cards, in my opinion.
I think this card's really overrated. And you are not the first person to push this one. I think I respect it a lot. I see the mentality with it. I think it's a card that definitely reads really, really well. But at the end of the day, I think the improvised part is going to be more of a nuisance than it feels like. With like Tivit specifically, it might be fine. And this kind of goes back to the same conversation we have with Piper, where I'm like, I don't want to be playing a bunch of cards that are like, oh, well, Tivit out, it's free. And it's like, well, that's not always how it's going to be. Right. And like, so that's my sort of qualm. You
have to remember you're talking to somebody who is a big fan of Inspiring Statuary and just loves that card. So I don't disagree with you. But it's a card that I think is worth like being aware of and thinking about, because I think Improvise has a downside to it right now, which is that Paradox Engine is banned. Improvise is significantly better when Paradox Engine is unbanned. And you're able to just kind of abuse the shit out of that mechanic. But I do still think that while this isn't my first pick for clone, like I think that my order of operations in like a Tivit deck, for instance, is 1 Phyrexian Metamorph, 2 you do Flush Duplicate, and then this might be higher than Flush Duplicate in that deck simply because of the fact that you have better tutors for it. And I think that is one of the upsides of it. Because there have been a non-zero amount of times where you use a transmute artifact or a War of Invention to go grab like a Phyrexian Metamorph. And so I do think that is like potentially a thing to keep in mind, but I don't think you play this over Flush Duplicate in that. But overall, I do think this is a cool card and something to keep your eyes on. And as I think like the mono blue Artifacts Matter decks, this is like a card that definitely would show up in that, right? So
yes.
Anyway, enough of my deranged discussions on things. Next card on the list, we're finally out of the creatures, baby. It's Nuclear Fallout.
Wait, but that's the name.
No, it's half the name of the set, silly. It's Nuclear Fallout. It costs X and black sorcery spell where each creature gets twice -X until end of turn. Each player gets X rad counters. So this is like a win condition that's also like a board wipe. It's like Exsanguinate, but with more upside. Yeah. Sort of. So what are your thoughts on this card, Ian?
Well, you said them. No, I mean...
That was a really big reaction. I apologize.
It's okay. No, it's a board wipe plus, right? Like that is actually it. This is a very solid board wipe. It provides you a lot of value. It's flexible. It's a little on the expensive side. Let's be honest about that. But if rad counters are an upside for you, that's pretty cool. If you're one of those decks that can like make infinite mana pretty easily, but you don't have a great outlet for in the command zone, this is a really nice way to do that. That's it.
Yep, that's it. All right, moving on. Inventory management. It is an instant with split second. There's a bunch of split second cards in this deck, or in this set, actually. For those of you who are unaware, split second is as long as the spell's on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. This one costs a red and a white. And for each aura and equipment you control, you may attach it to a creature you control. So this is obviously good in the like Cole deck, right? That's very good in those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. I think any Godo deck, period.
Godo
right?
is, I think White. That is also part of why I brought it up too, right? Is Arden Crom sees this card and get that there's a handful of cards. I tried to keep the Arden Crom love in this set review as minimal as possible. Because if I didn't, I could make this entire video, like an entire video that is just us talking about, or really me talking about Arden Crom cards.
And me being here.
Yeah. But I mean, like that is a really great like place to look at it, though, because it is very much a Godo deck, right? Very much is a Secret Commander Godo style thing. And having the ability to just auto equip things at split second speed, which is uninteractable, is a huge upside. And I really like this card for a variety of different things like that. And any sort of red-white deck that plays any amount of artifact or equipment, this is going to, or as an equipment, this is going to be good in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's like a very niche piece, right? But if it's a niche piece that fits a good role, then like that's all you need from it, right?
Yeah, 100%. Next card is our other split second card that we're going to be talking about, and that is the V.A.T.S. It is the Volt Tech activated or assisted targeting system. It redefines combat. Get your V.A.T.S. system today. It is an instant with split second that costs 2 generic, a black and a black, and choose any number of target creatures with equal toughness. Destroy the chosen creatures. I can hear the sound effect in my head. It is like burned into my brain, the sound effect, honestly. But yeah, this is really good. What are your thoughts on this card, Ian?
I think this card might have a bigger impact than folks are expecting it to be honest. Some of the things that are like coming to my head are like, specifically, Kinnan is a big problem in the format, right? It is a very good deck. And being able to be like, all right, cool. Everything with 2 toughness in the format, just insta dead. No ifs, ands, or buts.
No Goodbye. Interaction, baby.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the thought process with that. I don't really like have any other particular.
The fact that it's an instant with split second, I think, is the really huge important thing.
Right.
Because even if you are only destroying one thing, like it's still split second. Nobody can do anything about it. So it's like it's still huge.
Yeah. And like, I don't know. Like once again, like Kinnan, Grand Vulture, Opposition Agent, Dockside, technically, although you don't want that to die too often, right? Like the X2s are pretty potent. The X1s are not bad. You can wipe a Bowmaster and stuff like that. So like I did.
It's when you get to the X3s where I actually think it gets ridiculous, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Anti-stacks version of this card is quite cool.
It nukes stacks pretty hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excuse me. I'm a fan. I like this card. God, I what it is, I drink a Coke and now I'm gassy. Or not gassy, I have a burpee, whatever.
Lovely. No, I think a lot of interesting stuff is going to come out of this card. When I first saw it, I was like kind of like, oh God, is this too good?
Yeah.
And I reread it a couple times and I'm like, no, I don't think that's quite the case. I don't think it's like exceptionally insane, but I think it's a role player, right?
I think it's very good though. Right.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be good. The biggest thing, and for 100%, is going to be justifying the 4 mana you pay for it, right? But if I'm looking at something like Besh Crom or something like that, right? Like that's like not a problem necessarily.
Well, how many times like DM usually costs 4 mana, right? Like we talk about Languish, right, we talk about I mean, even like Toxic Deluge is 3 mana, and then you have to pay a bunch of life. And this is like, okay, but what if you don't pay a bunch of life, right? Like, granted, it can't hit everything, but I think that is an advantage. I think that is a feature, not a bug, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's It's going to be interesting to see where this lands, you know. But I am optimistic that we'll see some stuff with it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Next card on our list is Bottle Cap Blast. It is an instant that costs 4 generic and a red. Again, with Improvise, and says it deals 5 damage to any target. If excess damage was dealt to a permanent this way, create that many tapped treasure tokens. This can be pseudo ramp in a way, but also more importantly is pretty cheap, efficient removal.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a Magda card, right? Like that's 1,000% why it's on this list. One of the biggest things with Magda, right, is like you're going to end up in scenarios where you want to use removal, you want to use like interaction and stuff like that, but you either have to go down resources of creatures, you have to go down treasures, right, and all that stuff. The fact that this has Improvise, you can tap like end step. You can, if there's a Bowmasters on the field, right, you can be like, cool, end step, I'm going to improvise 4 of my treasures or improvise some of my other random artifacts, because you play stuff like Sphere of Resistance or like Curio or vehicles or like any of that stuff, right? You can be like, cool, tap all those, pay 1 mana, hit a 1/1, make 4 tap treasures, go to win the game, right? Like there's a lot of really interesting play patterns that you can execute that just sort of pop off of this card. So I would be very surprised if this does not see some Magda play, and I'm curious to hear if it like makes it to most versions of this deck.
Right. Next card on our list is the Pip-Boy 3000. This is very much an Arden card. I would be remiss if I did not talk about this card. I got 1,000 messages about this when it was when it was spoiled. Because as soon as it was spoiled, everybody was like, "Oh my God, it's an Arden card!" And yes, to the shock and awe of everybody, this is very much an Arden card. Whenever equipped, it is a 1 mana artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature attacks, choose 1. You have the ability to draw a card, then discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, or untap up to 2 target lands, and it's only equipped 2. The big advantage of this being that it is a 1 cost equipment, and that is huge. Getting like a second Skull Clamp effectively that does a lot of work for you is a huge deal in that deck, and it has a little bit of the it shares not all but some aesthetical similarities to like a Umezawa's Jite in a way that really fits what the deck is trying to do. And so again, I had to bring this up because listen, I'm the Arden person, right? If I didn't bring this up, I would get a zillion. Why didn't you talk about the Pip-Boy card? The card is very good. I will be playing Arden more in the upcoming months. But it is is
it more like the I'm going to develop a resource and then untap mana part of it that's the attractive part?
So it's more of the fact that it is, remember earlier when we were talking about with like Curie, right? How like the ability to Urza Saga stuff really cleanly is good. It's very similar in Arden, where Urza Saga plays a huge role in the deck, where it is a very clean and on curve way of getting out like a Skull Clamp. Same goes with this, where it gives you more options to grab. This also being able to put a +1/+1 counter on creatures is really good. It's card draw or minimum card selection. And again, like you said, being able to untap some lands is really solid. So you are going to be like, it does ramp you a little bit because you generally are not paying that equip cost. So that is again a bonus to this, but realistically, it is the big attractive piece of this is it's a 1 mana equipment that does a lot of stuff. and you want your 1 mana, or you want your equipment in the deck to do a lot of things and wear a lot of hats. And that's what this does. So.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. For me, I was just like, I don't really know what, because they seem small, right? Like that's my critic, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like a lot. Like you're not taking out like a sword of fire and ice for this, right? But it again, like one of the big things in there is like and I've said this a lot, right? Is a lot of the like philosophy with that deck is that like Arden is for equipment what Tymna is for creatures. And so when you have equipment that draw you cards when you attack, it just kind of makes Arden better, if that makes sense. So that alone. And then when you have the other two pieces on top of it, that's like gravy. So that is the thought. I got a bunch of messages from it. Thank you everybody who sent me messages about this card. I initially did not know it was 1 mana. I initially didn't read it properly. I thought it was 3 mana because I thought it was part of the whole agility or whatever it was, special system cycle. Yeah. And it wasn't until Sick Robot and I were talking about it and he was like, no, it's 1 mana. And I was like, oh shit. That's a lot better than I thought it was. Because at first I was like, I thought it was 3 mana. I didn't think it was very good. But when it's 1 mana and it does all that, I'm like, okay, I think that's playable. So,
yeah.
So next card on our list is Automated Assembly Line. This is an artifact that costs a generic and a white and says whenever one or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, get an energy counter. Then you can pay 3 energy and create a tapped 3/3 colorless robot artifact creature token. So this is like a pretty decent energy generator, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
The second part of the activated ability of it, I think is like fine. I don't feel strongly about it.
That's the part that's actually attractive to me is the 3 energy for a 3/3 is like pretty not
bad. It is good, right? Like, I think I would like it more if it didn't come into play tapped. That is the big downside to me is it comes into play tapped. And so I'm like, it's a thing you have to do on an end step to really get value out of, because you can't do it to like block with it.
Right. No, I mean, we were literally just talking about earlier how like Madison Li is like making a bunch of really interesting stuff with like, you know, tapping and untapping and artifacts and all that stuff, right? Like this card feels like it's kind of like in the same vein. Once again, another energy later on is going to make this interesting, but it does so much for 2 mana is the reason that I think we both wanted to talk about this, is that like 2 mana equaling outlet and equaling enabler to gain more energy.
I'm glad you are also like interested in this, because I was a little afraid that it was just a like, oh, Cal, you really like energy, huh?
I think it's fascinating. I don't know. Once again, like I'm not quantifying anything specifically at the current moment because I don't think we can. That doesn't mean that it's not an interesting deep dive, right? Like that is. I think
and again, like we said earlier, I think energy is only going to get better. And I think Modern Horizon is not going to be the end of what we see with energy. I think if they are doing 2 concurrent sets with that mechanic, it's not going away. They are going to be doing more with it. So, which is great. I love this mechanic. It's one of my favorite mechanics of all time. But yeah, I think this is cool. I do like that it is whenever it has a little bit of that Tymna feel to it, right? Where you get energy. So if energy matters to you, it's like kind of a Tymna if you squint hard enough.
Sure.
So I think it's cool. I do wish the creatures didn't come into play tapped. I understand why they do. I just would like this to be better. Yeah, that's that. I do understand that if they didn't, I imagine there is some legacy thing that this would disrupt probably.
Yeah, sure.
Legacy is always doing something stupid with 2 mana artifacts. But yeah, no, I like this card. I'm excited about it. I'm really excited about the return of energy, just generally speaking, but Next card on our list. This is probably one of my favorite game modes from Fallout New Vegas. This is Wild Wasteland. Have you played the Wild Wasteland version?
Yeah, almost exclusively. Yeah.
Yeah. Wild Wasteland is, if you want to have a good time playing New Vegas, well, it depends on how you'd find good time. Wild Wasteland is a very fun time, especially when you find the town of people who are just like doing Monty Python sketches effectively. It's very good. But this is an enchantment that costs 2 generic and a red and says skip your draw step. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library, and you may play those cards this turn. So again, this is kind of interesting. This has some of that, again, feels like a good card in like a Prosper, potentially. I think it reminds me a little bit of, I'm trying to think of the card that it reminds me of. I was initially like, oh, it's kind of like Necropotence, but I was like, no, that's not a good comparison. But I do like that you have the ability to just be like, oh, you can't kill me with Brain Freeze, baby. What are you going to do? I don't draw cards, or I don't draw cards on my draw step. You got to do something more concrete. But what are your thoughts on this overall, Ian?
I mean, this is just like, it's a Prosper card. I think that's like literally it for me.
Yeah.
I think it's a card that's very risky to play.
100%.
And that's the majority of it for me, right? Like, it's red card advantage. It's a little funky for sure.
If you skip your draw step and you have a tapped mana vault, you don't take a damage.
True. You also straight up lose to a Drained Magistrate.
It doesn't say you can't draw. Just says, you can still draw, just not during your draw step because you skip it.
Yeah. It's so fine. You lose to a Drained Magistrate, as I said.
It's fine. Play Necropotence with this. Fine.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting card for sure.
Yeah.
This plus Necro is a very funny interaction, I will say.
It is very funny. Next card on our list is Grim Reaper's Sprint. This is actually the last card on our list. It is a aura enchantment that costs 4 generic and a red. Has Morbid. The spell costs 3 less to cast if a creature died this turn. And when it enters the battlefield, untap each creature you control. If it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. And enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has haste. This was an Ian edition. What are you thinking on this one, Ian?
I think this card's my favorite card in the set that's not a creature.
Okay.
This is like really strong. So it's specific, right? I think this opens up new archetypes. I genuinely think it does.
Okay.
Specifically because what this card does is if you can flicker it, it can give you infinite combats. You need a target for it, right? So like this card's kind of insane in like Narset, right? Because you attack with Narset, trigger Kitten, flicker the sprint, reattach it to Narset, go to an extra combat, just to go infinite, literally. You can do stuff with like Felidar Guardian and like other cards with it. So like, there's not the most insane amounts of combos with it, right? But like, even just like with a Crom, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have Crom plus Displacer Kitten and just like 1 or 2 non-creatures, you can, push through multiple iterations of 6 damage,
right.
Potentially for only 2 mana as an initial investment. A big part of it is like, once again, it's a 2 mana extra combat, right? Like, so something dies, and there are many decks where you can make something die pretty easily. Like,
it's not hard.
Is an entire archetype for cEDH, right?
Yeah.
So you can straight up make something die, and then you're like, cool, 2 mana, give a thing +2/+2, have an extra combat. Obviously, because it's an aura, there are downsides, being specifically the fact that these things will auras can like create a situation where they blow you out by like removing the creature itself, right? But I don't know if there's any like combos with this specifically, as far as like this thing dies, then gets brought back to the battlefield, attaches something, then dies. Then I don't know if that's a thing. I know there's one card that brings a bunch of auras back from the graveyard, but I don't know that it drops them at the end step. But if there's anything that like does that, like that can potentially kind of pop off too as well. So yeah, there's just a lot of interesting stuff. And once again, the fact that this is an extra combat effect that can ETB is like really interesting, right? It's like if you flicker this, it makes another combat, which also is pretty breakable.
Also interesting, just as from the ETB perspective, in like the like Jeskai ascendancies type thing we were talking about earlier, right? Because it does, regardless, untap each creature you control and enters the battlefield. Yeah. So like I think there is like a world. I didn't think about that part too. Like there's a world where you don't even care about like the combat step is just like extra gravy, right? Like the first part of it was the part that I saw and was initially like, oh shit, that's hot.
Because this plus Displacer Kitten means that you can like you basically assemble your own Paradox engine with the creatures, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Like this with like any way to make mana or something, right? Like you can just kind of be like, all right, I'm gonna make a bunch of mana. And so, and then if you have something along the lines of like a Dr. Madison Li or maybe a better tap outlet thing, if that thing exists, I think Dr. Madison Li is the pinnacle of tap artifact outlets for sure, tap outlets. But you have something maybe less good that you want to do with that. This is definitely a good way of doing that. And so I think there's something there. I don't know exactly what it is. I think that the ability to untap creatures is the strong part of this personally. I think that's the easier of them to like take advantage of the most. Like I think like right away, one thing that I notice, like, let's just say I'm just playing with Dr. Madison Li, right? If I put this on 3-Dog, then I can, and I have like the Jeskai Ascendancy thing out or whatever. Like I'm going to get a bunch of untapped triggers that I can abuse the fuck of at the beginning of combat. Right.
Yep.
So I think that is huge. I think that is really cool. I don't know exactly what I would do with it, but there's definitely shenanigans to be had. So
yeah, I'm all about that part for sure.
100%. Well, that is 2 hours and change in the books. Ian, what are your thoughts on this set overall? I like it. What do you think?
I like it. Not the strongest set we've ever had for sure. But I think there's some really interesting stuff in there. There's some unique synergies. I think the Master is like easily a cEDH deck from now on. 100%. I don't think that's even a question.
I think that's actually the first Universes Beyond Commander that we've gotten where we're like, oh, that's just going to be around.
Yeah, other of them have had like a little bit of ups and downs and stuff like that, but like this one is like, that's in.
That's gonna be in the meta.
Period. Yep. I like this card a lot. That card's gotten me the most excited for this entire set. I actually am really excited about some of the other ones. They're a little funkier, you know what I mean? They require a little bit more work. Rose is getting me really pumped about mono red. I love Fallout in general, so me like too. It was very exciting for me to see the set. I would have. I would love to say that there were like, I didn't love the fact there was an entire aura and enchantment deck, right? Or aura and equipment deck, right? Like, I don't think we needed another one of those, but like, it's okay.
With that being said, though, we did also get an entire fucking energy deck, which is so cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even fully like go down the energy rabbit hole with this. Like, I'm sure there are new energy cards that were spoiled that I just completely missed, right?
Yeah.
Like,
There's a bunch of proliferate stuff in the mutant deck too. That's like sort of the same rabbit hole too, right? But at the end of the day, I'm really happy it exists. I was and am a huge Fallout fanboy, so like I'm happy that there is at least a Fallout card that I'm like, I'm probably gonna play this forever for now.
Yeah.
And it also happens to be like literally one of my first ever primer decks is just an upgrade to this card. Is like pretty sick. I'm not gonna lie.
the Master, if I remember, is from Fallout 2.
Yes.
I think it's from 2. Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, I know it's not in the Bethesda era, but I was like, I couldn't remember if it was 1 or 2.
Part of it. The part is it's definitely not from a Fallout game I've ever played, but like it's hard to.
I have done so much just like Fallout lore looking up because the lore of that world is so fucking cool. It's super, super cool world. Love it so much. Yep. I don't know that I will ever play 1 or 2 just because I think they are like, if you have ever seen the interface for Fallout 1, it is like just absolute dog shit. Like it is not uncommon for people to name their first character like None because they didn't know where to change their name at or how to change it.
Oh, good.
So a lot of people have accidentally named their first character None, which is very funny. But yeah, no, I'm very excited about this. Fallout New Vegas is one of my like top 5 favorite games of all time. So getting, you know, like even like from a casual perspective, right? Like having cards like Caesar and Mr. House and just cards that or even who's the Legion guy that you fight at the end of the game, right? And I can't remember his name. All of a sudden I could see him, but like
Leggett, whatever his name is.
Yeah, the big Legionnaire guy. But like that, like I think is so cool, and it's really cool, like to see all of that stuff realized. And I've said this before. I love Universes Beyond. That's not me being a Wizards fanboy. That's me just being a fanboy of other like intellectual properties and love getting to play with those IPs in my favorite game. And I understand people's trepidation with it. I'm not there. I love it. I think it's cool. I like seeing the top down design. I like seeing all of it. It's so cool. But I could do a whole video on that, honestly. But with that being said, Ian, you do coaching. Where can people find you for coaching?
Hey, everybody. So for those who don't know, cEDH coaching is my full-time occupation. I have been quite successful in the world of cEDH. And
honestly, just successful in the world of Magic, I feel like, just across the board.
That. Thank you very much.
Doing pretty good.
As far as like cEDH tournaments are concerned, I have pretty good record going. If one of the best in the world, and I have devoted my full-time career to coaching people in cEDH, and it's a super awesome experience. I've had a number of players who have done coaching with me make top cut recently of big tournaments. I've had people like really go out of their way to say like, hey, thank God we made these changes. Like it completely has changed my performance.
And not to interrupt you, but we had a bunch of those people come and see us on Saturday and like tell you like in person, like how much they appreciated the coaching you did. And that was really fun to watch.
Thanks. So if you would like to be one of those future people, you can feel free to reach out to me. Cal is wonderful and puts a lot of my contact in the description, but in every single one of my YouTube videos as well, over at Comedian MTG on YouTube, you can find any of those places. But comedianmtg@gmail.com is my email. comedian_MTG on Discord, and at comedianmtg over on Twitter. So any of those places, feel free to shoot me a DM. We can figure out times, places, all that stuff. I'm really excited, and hopefully we'll be working with some of you soon.
Yeah, we'd love to see it. And also make sure to head over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and help support us out. I know that I said at the beginning of the year I was going to have new patron tiers up. As you can see, that did not happen, but it is going to be happening eventually. It's just a when Cal does it issue. But we do have Patreon right now available for you if you want to support us. We really greatly appreciate that. And also, if you do want Mind Sculptors merch, please do, like Ian said earlier in the show, please leave a comment down below if that is something you are interested. So we know that we don't just go make a bunch of stuff for the sake of making a bunch of stuff. We'd love to do that for you guys. Whether it's playmats or whatever, we want to be able to provide things that you guys want, not just throw stuff at you. So that is a huge thing for both of us. So
absolutely.
With that being said, Ian, I know we do a lot of these different outros, but I think the best outro that I can do is, the Mind Sculptors never changes. And that's it. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Cal.
I'm Ian.
And we'll see you next time.